The courtroom fell silent as the gavel struck. "Guilty," announced the judge, his voice echoing through the chamber like a death knell. Sarah Matthews, just 19 years old, collapsed into sobs as the bailiffs approached. In the gallery, her father Michael stood frozen, watching helplessly as his only child was led away in handcuffs for a crime she didn't commit. Meanwhile, across town, the real monster walked free, smiling at the news of Sarah's conviction. What the system didn't know, what nobody could have predicted, was that they hadn't just sentenced an innocent girl. They had created a war, and Michael Matthews was about to become its only soldier. If you're feeling that chill down your spine already, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories of justice, revenge, and the lengths a parent will go to protect their child. This is one journey you won't want to miss. Michael Matthews had always been an ordinary man. At 47, his life had settled into comfortable predictability: 22 years at the same accounting firm, 19 years in the same modest suburban home, and 18 years raising his daughter as a single father after his wife Caroline's death from cancer. He was the kind of man neighbors waved to but rarely remembered, the type who blended into the background of community meetings and school functions. "Dad, I got in," Sarah had exclaimed just 7 months earlier, bursting through the front door waving her college acceptance letter. Michael had lifted her off her feet in a bear hug, his heart swelling with pride. Caroline would have been so proud to see their daughter heading to her alma mater on a partial scholarship. "Your mother always said you'd outshine us both," he'd told her, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah had her mother's eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber, and the same determined set to her jaw. But she had Michael's quiet thoughtfulness, his methodical approach to problems. She was studying criminal justice, ironically enough. "I want to help people, Dad," she'd explained. "Make sure the system works the way it's supposed to." The memory of that conversation now felt like a cruel joke as Michael sat in his car outside the county courthouse, rain streaming down the windshield, blurring the world beyond. The trial had lasted just 6 days. 6 days to destroy everything. The charges had seemed absurd from the beginning: armed robbery at a convenience store near campus, assault on the clerk who'd suffered a concussion during the incident. The security footage was grainy, showing someone of Sarah's height and build, face obscured by a hoodie. The prosecution had cell tower data placing Sarah's phone in the vicinity, and a witness who claimed to recognize her distinctive backpack leaving the scene. "This isn't possible," Sarah had whispered when the police came to her dorm room. "I was studying in the library all night. Ask my roommate, ask anyone." But her roommate had been at her boyfriend's apartment. The library's sign-in system had been down for maintenance. And Sarah's student ID had been used to enter her dorm building just 30 minutes after the robbery, plenty of time to get from the store to campus, the prosecution argued. Michael had spent every penny of his savings and remortgaged his house to hire the best defense attorney he could find. Elaine Winters had a reputation for winning impossible cases, but even she seemed increasingly grim as the evidence mounted. "Someone setting her up," Michael had insisted during their final pre-trial meeting. Elaine had given him a sympathetic look. "The problem is, we can't prove who or why. Without that, all we have is circumstantial denials against physical evidence." The final blow had come from Detective James Harmon, the lead investigator who testified about finding the stolen cash hidden in Sarah's dorm room air vent. A common hiding place for first-time offenders, he'd explained to the jury with practiced authority. "They think it's clever because it's not immediately visible." Sarah had looked at Michael from the defendant's table, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "I didn't do this, Dad," she'd mouthed silently. "I swear." He believed her. With every fiber of his being, he knew his daughter was innocent. But the jury hadn't. 5 years. That was the sentence. 5 years for a first offense, with possibility of parole after 3 with good behavior. The judge had called it lenient. Michael started his car, his movements mechanical. The rain had stopped, but he barely noticed. His mind was already shifting, transforming in ways he couldn't fully comprehend yet. The ordinary man who had entered that courthouse was not the same one leaving it now. His phone buzzed with a text from Elaine, "We'll appeal. Don't lose hope." But hope wasn't what Michael felt coursing through him. It was something darker, more primal. Something that had lain dormant inside him since Caroline's death, when he'd channeled all his grief into being the father Sarah needed. Someone did this to her, he whispered to himself. Someone knows the truth. And Michael Matthews was going to find them, no matter what it took. Detective James Harmon lived in a renovated Victorian on the affluent side of town, a house that seemed excessive for a man on a detective's salary. Michael observed it from his parked car 3 blocks away, using a pair of binoculars he'd purchased that morning along with several other items that now sat in a duffel bag on his passenger seat. For 2 weeks since Sarah's sentencing, Michael had been methodically building files on everyone connected to her case. He'd taken a leave of absence from work, citing personal reasons. His boss had been understanding, everyone knew about Sarah's conviction, and the pitying looks followed Michael everywhere. What nobody knew was that Michael had converted his home office into an investigation room. The walls were covered with photos, notes, timelines. He'd spent hours learning how to access public records, studying police procedures, and reviewing every detail of the case against his daughter. Detective Harmon had quickly emerged as the central figure. The man had led the investigation, found the key evidence, and testified with such conviction that the jury had been swayed beyond doubt. Something about Harmon's testimony had nagged at Michael, the detective's absolute certainty, the convenient discovery of the cash, the way he dismissed Sarah's alibi claims without thorough investigation. Now, watching Harmon's house, Michael noticed something else suspicious, the detective's lifestyle. The pristine landscaping, the luxury SUV in the driveway, the recent kitchen renovation visible through the windows. Public records showed Harmon had purchased the house 3 years ago, shortly after divorcing his wife of 12 years. Michael's phone buzzed. It was a text from his new contact, a court clerk named Denise who had taken pity on him and agreed to quietly provide access to records that might help with Sarah's appeal. Found something. Can meet tomorrow. He texted back a confirmation, then returned his attention to Harmon's house. The detective emerged, dressed not in his usual work attire but in an expensive-looking suit. He climbed into his SUV and drove away, and Michael followed at a careful distance. Harmon's destination was an upscale restaurant downtown. Through the window, Michael watched as the detective joined a well-dressed man at a corner table. Even from a distance, Michael recognized him, Victor Reeves, owner of several businesses in the county, including the convenience store where the robbery had taken place. "Interesting friends you have, detective," Michael murmured, snapping photos with a telephoto lens. The next day, Denise the court clerk slid a manila envelope across the table at a quiet coffee shop far from the courthouse. "I could lose my job for this," she said nervously. "I appreciate the risk you're taking," Michael replied. "Sarah's innocent. I just need to prove it." Inside the envelope were copies of Detective Harmon's case notes, the complete file, not just the portions that had been shared with the defense. Michael's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages later that night at his kitchen table. There it was, buried in the interview notes, a statement from a homeless man who claimed to have seen someone matching the robber's description dump something in a trash can 2 blocks from the convenience store. The man had described a tall figure in a dark hoodie, but had specifically mentioned the person was definitely a dude, walked like a linebacker. This statement had never been entered into evidence. Never shared with the defense. Never investigated further. Michael's heart raced. It was the first concrete piece of evidence supporting Sarah's innocence, evidence that had been deliberately buried. But why? What connection could exist between Detective Harmon, Victor Reeves, and framing a random college student for robbery? The answer came 3 days later, when Michael's systematic investigation led him to a name he hadn't expected, Jason Reeves, Victor's son. Jason was 22, a senior at the same university Sarah attended. His social media showed an entitled young man who flaunted his father's wealth, parties on yachts, expensive cars, designer clothes. But digging deeper, Michael found court records that had been sealed, 2 juvenile arrests for assault, 1 for drug possession, all mysteriously resolved without charges. And then, the connection that made Michael's blood run cold: Jason had been in the same criminal justice ethics class as Sarah last semester. According to the university directory, they had even been assigned to the same study group for a major project. Michael's hands shook as he pinned Jason's photo to his investigation wall. The physical resemblance wasn't striking, but they were similar in height and build. If wearing a hoodie with the face obscured. He did it, Michael whispered. He robbed his father's store, and when he needed a scapegoat. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture so corrupt it took his breath away. A wealthy family protecting their son. A detective willing to frame an innocent student to curry favor with a powerful businessman. A system so easily manipulated that a young woman's life could be destroyed to save a guilty man's future. Michael sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was uncovering. Sarah had been chosen not randomly, but specifically, someone Jason knew from class, someone whose routine he could learn, whose ID he could somehow duplicate or steal temporarily. The rage that had been building inside Michael for weeks crystallized into something cold and focused. This wasn't just about freeing Sarah anymore. It was about exposing the corruption that had stolen her freedom, her future, her faith in the justice system she had wanted to serve. They framed my daughter, he said to the empty room. And they freed a monster. The ordinary accountant, the quiet widower, the devoted father, that man was gone now. In his place stood someone new, a man at war. The women's correctional facility was a stark concrete structure surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Michael sat across from Sarah in the visitation room, his heart breaking at the sight of her in the drab prison uniform, her face thinner, dark circles under her eyes. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm okay, Dad. The appeal will work, right? Ms. Winters says we have grounds for one." Michael nodded, not trusting himself to speak immediately. He couldn't tell her what he discovered, couldn't burden her with knowledge that might give her dangerous hope or put her at risk if she inadvertently revealed something to the wrong person. "We're working on it," he said finally. "I need you to stay strong, keep your head down, and trust me." Sarah studied his face. Even as a child, she'd been perceptive, able to read him better than anyone. "You look different, Dad. What's going on?" "Just not sleeping well," he deflected. "I miss you." "There's something you're not telling me," she pressed. Michael reached across the table to take her hand, ignoring the guard's warning glance. "I believe in you. I know you're innocent. And I will never, ever stop fighting to bring you home. That's all you need to know right now." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "Some days I wake up and for a second, I forget where I am. Then it all comes crashing back." She lowered her voice. "My roommate here says I should just confess, show remorse to get earlier parole. But how can I confess to something I didn't do?" "Don't," Michael said firmly. "Don't ever admit to something you didn't do. The truth matters, Sarah. It's all that matters in the end." As he drove home from the prison, Michael's resolve hardened. The truth did matter, and he was going to make sure it came to light, one way or another. His next step was clear: he needed evidence, not just theories. He needed proof that Jason Reeves had committed the robbery, that Detective Harmon had planted evidence, that Victor Reeves had used his influence to protect his son. Michael's accounting background proved unexpectedly useful. He knew how to follow money trails, how to spot inconsistencies in financial records. Using public databases and some less-than-legal hacking techniques he'd taught himself, he began tracking Detective Harmon's finances. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable once he knew what to look for: deposits to an offshore account, made through a series of shells, all originating from a holding company owned by Victor Reeves. The amounts weren't enormous, nothing flashy enough to trigger automatic audits, but they added up to over $200,000 in the past 3 years. Gotcha, Michael whispered, printing the records and adding them to his growing file. But financial records alone wouldn't be enough. He needed something more concrete connecting Jason to the robbery. And for that, he needed to get closer to the young man himself. Jason Reeves, it turned out, was a creature of habit. Every Friday night, he could be found at Elevation, an exclusive nightclub downtown where he held court at a reserved VIP table, surrounded by sycophants and spending his father's money on overpriced bottles of champagne. Michael spent a week's salary on clothes that would help him blend in, designer jeans, an expensive watch, rented, a blazer that the sales associate assured him was what the young professionals are wearing. He felt ridiculous, like a middle-aged man trying too hard, but that was exactly the cover he needed. Just a divorced dad having a midlife crisis, he muttered to his reflection as he styled his hair in a way he hadn't worn it since his 20s. Elevation's doorman initially looked skeptical when Michael approached, but the $100 bill slipped discreetly into his hand changed his expression. "Enjoy your evening, sir," he said, unclipping the velvet rope. Inside, the club was a sensory assault, pulsing music, flashing lights, bodies pressed together on the dance floor. Michael made his way to the bar, ordered a scotch he didn't intend to drink, and surveyed the scene until he spotted Jason's VIP section. The young man was holding court exactly as Michael had expected, loud, animated, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. 5 or 6 friends surrounded him, along with several young women who looked barely old enough to be in the club. Michael's plan was simple but risky. He'd planted a story with several people in his network that he was considering investing in a new business venture, something vague about tech startups and venture capital. The story had been crafted to reach Victor Reeves' circles, making Michael appear as a potential business connection worth cultivating. Now, he just needed the bait to be taken. It took nearly an hour of careful positioning, accidentally making eye contact, and strategic comments within earshot before one of Jason's friends approached him at the bar. "Hey, you're Matthews, right? The investor guy?" Michael feigned mild surprise. "That's right. And you are?" "Tyler Kincaid. I'm friends with Jason Reeves, his dad mentioned you might be around. Said you're looking at some interesting opportunities." Michael allowed a small smile. "Word travels fast in this town. You should join us," Tyler said, gesturing toward the VIP section. "Jason's dad has his fingers in all kinds of pies. Could be useful connections." "Why not?" Michael replied, picking up his barely touched drink and following Tyler to Jason's table. The introduction was casual, Jason clearly uninterested until Tyler mentioned potential investment opportunities. Then the young man's attention sharpened, his eyes calculating as he assessed Michael. "What kind of capital are you working with?" Jason asked bluntly. Michael gave a noncommittal answer about diverse portfolios and looking for the right opportunity rather than just throwing money around. "I'm more interested in people than projects," he said. "Finding the right partners is key." It was the perfect approach for someone like Jason, flattering his ego while dangling the possibility of easy money. By the end of the night, Michael had been invited to a small gathering at Jason's apartment the following weekend. Just a few friends, some business talk, maybe some poker, Jason had said. Low-key, you know. Michael knew it would be anything but low-key. And he was counting on it. The week before the party, Michael prepared meticulously. He purchased a high-quality hidden camera disguised as a tie clip, practiced using it until the movements were natural. He rehearsed his cover story, adding details that could be verified if anyone checked. He studied Jason's social media, learning his speech patterns, his interests, the names of his close friends. When Saturday night arrived, Michael was ready. Jason's apartment was in a luxury high-rise downtown, another sign of Victor Reeves' financial support for his son's lifestyle. That small gathering turned out to be about 20 people, most of